At 37,000 feet, both pilots collapsed. 300 lives hung in the balance, and only one person could save them, a 17-year-old student in seat 14C who had never flown a real plane. She would have to land the passenger jet completely alone. This is her true story. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The pilots collapsed at 37,000 feet. 300 passengers, no communication with the ground, and the only person who could possibly save them was a 17-year-old girl in seat 14C who had never flown a real aircraft. The flight attendants had served her apple juice like any other teenager. The businessman beside her had dismissed her completely when she tried making polite conversation. Nobody knew that in 2 hours, aviation authorities worldwide would be calling her emergency landing impossible. Maya Chin pressed her face against the airplane window, watching the clouds stretch endlessly below like a white ocean frozen in time. At 17, she still felt that same flutter of excitement every time a plane lifted off. Her worn backpack sat wedged under the seat in front of her, crammed full with flight manuals, simulator log books, cockpit procedure guides, and a tablet loaded with hundreds of hours of instructional videos she had watched until she could recite them from memory. She was traveling alone from Seattle to New York, a graduation gift from her parents who had saved for months to give her this trip. Her mother had held her tight at the airport security checkpoint, tears in her eyes, telling her to be safe and call the moment she landed. Her father had squeezed her shoulder and said with a knowing smile, "Remember everything you have learned. Knowledge is never wasted. You never know when it becomes the difference between life and death." Maya had laughed and hugged him, thinking he was just being his usual dramatic self, never understanding that those words would echo through her mind during the most terrifying hours of her young life. To everyone on Flight 2847, Maya was just another teenage girl, probably listening to music and scrolling through social media. The flight attendant handed her a can of ginger ale without really looking at her. Nobody knew that the quiet girl in the faded jeans and oversized Aviation Academy hoodie had spent countless nights studying commercial aircraft systems. That she had memorized emergency procedures for scenarios most passengers never even imagined. That she had logged over 600 hours in flight simulators practicing everything from routine approaches to catastrophic emergencies. Maya was not just interested in flying. She was consumed by it, obsessed with it in a way that made her different from other girls her age. While her classmates were at football games and parties, Maya was in her bedroom with her homemade simulator setup, practicing instrument approaches to airports she had never visited, memorizing the location of every switch and circuit breaker in a Boeing 767 cockpit, studying aerodynamics and weather patterns and air traffic control procedures. Her friends thought she was weird. Her teachers encouraged her passion but gently reminded her that simulators were not real flying. And Maya knew that. She understood perfectly well that despite all her theoretical knowledge, despite her hundreds of simulator hours, she was not actually a pilot. She was just a high school student with a dream that seemed impossibly far away. Flight 2847 was a Boeing 767. The moment Maya had seen it at the gate, her heart had skipped with recognition. The 767 was her favorite aircraft to study, the one she knew better than any other. She could recite its specifications without thinking. Wingspan of 156 feet, length of 159 feet, typical cruise speed of Mach 0.80, maximum range of over 6,000 miles. She knew it used a two-pilot glass cockpit with digital displays, that its fly-by-wire systems made it more forgiving than older aircraft, that its autopilot was sophisticated enough to handle most of the flying if properly programmed. She had spent so many nights flying this exact model in her simulator, practicing normal operations and emergency procedures, learning every system until the cockpit layout was burned into her memory. But sitting in seat 14C now, sipping her ginger ale and listening to a podcast about aviation history, Maya never seriously imagined she would need any of that knowledge. She was just another passenger on just another routine flight, one of 300 people making the unremarkable journey from the West Coast to the East Coast. The middle-aged businessman in seat 14B was absorbed in his laptop. When Maya had tried to make polite conversation earlier, He barely grunted a response, clearly not interested in chatting with a teenage girl. The woman in seat 14A was reading a thick thriller novel. Behind Maya, a young family struggled to keep two small children entertained. Across the aisle, an elderly couple sat hand in hand, their eyes closed peacefully as they dozed. The flight had been smooth so far, nearly 2 hours of peaceful cruising at 37,000 feet with nothing but endless blue sky visible outside. Everything was perfectly normal, perfectly routine, exactly as it should be. Then Maya noticed something that made her aviation instinct suddenly alert. The flight attendants who had been casually moving through the cabin suddenly clustered together near the front galley. Their body language had changed completely. They were speaking in urgent whispers, their expressions tight with worry. One of them kept glancing nervously toward the cockpit door. Another pulled out what looked like an emergency procedures manual, flipping through pages with trembling hands. Maya pulled out her earbuds, her full attention now focused on the crew. Something was wrong. She had studied enough about aviation to recognize the signs of a developing emergency. Then came the announcement that would change everything. The voice that came over the intercom belonged to Carol, the head flight attendant. But now her voice was different, tight with barely controlled fear despite obvious efforts to sound calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a medical emergency with our flight crew. If there are any licensed pilots on board this aircraft, please identify yourselves to a flight attendant immediately. This is urgent." The cabin erupted in confused murmurs that quickly escalated to worried conversations. Maya's heart began pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. A medical emergency with the crew could only mean one thing. The pilots were incapacitated. She watched with growing dread as the flight attendants moved quickly through the aisles, scanning faces desperately. 3 minutes passed, then 5, and no one came forward. No off-duty airline pilot happened to be on board. No military aviator was traveling that day. The fear in the cabin was becoming palpable now. Passengers were whispering frantically. Some were crying. Others were pulling out phones to send what they feared might be final messages to loved ones. Carol's voice came over the intercom again, no longer trying to hide her desperation. "Please, we need anyone with any flight training or aviation experience. If you have any knowledge of flying aircraft, any experience at all, we urgently need your assistance. Please identify yourself immediately." Maya's hands were gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Any flight training? She had training, sort of. More than 600 hours in high-end flight simulators. 2 full years of intensive aviation study. She had memorized the entire Boeing 767 operations manual. She had practiced emergency procedures until she could execute them in her sleep. But she was not a real pilot. She was just 17 years old. She had never actually flown a real airplane, never been responsible for anything more serious than a simulated emergency that she could pause or restart if things went wrong. The woman in 14A was crying now. Behind her, Maya could hear the mother trying to comfort her frightened children while her own voice shook with terror. The elderly couple across the aisle were holding each other with fear in their faces. Maya took a deep breath and unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was surprisingly clear. She had studied for this kind of scenario. She knew procedures. She knew systems. She knew what needed to be done, at least in theory. And right now, theory was all anyone had. "Excuse me," she said quietly to a passing flight attendant who looked close to panic. "I have had flight training." The young woman turned to her and for a moment hope flashed across her features before doubt replaced it. "You are a pilot?" "No," Maya admitted, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I am not licensed, but I have been studying aviation seriously for 2 years. I have done extensive simulator training on this exact aircraft type, the Boeing 767. I know the systems and I know emergency procedures." Carol appeared beside them. When she saw Maya standing there, 17 years old and looking even younger in her hoodie and worn sneakers, her face fell with disappointment. "How old are you, honey?" 17. "But I know this airplane. I have trained on it extensively in professional-grade simulators. I have studied the system's manual, the emergency procedures, everything. Simulators are not the same as real flying," Carol said, though her tone was pleading, almost begging Maya to convince her otherwise. "I know they are not," Maya said quietly, looking directly into the older woman's frightened eyes. "But right now, I am the closest thing to a pilot you are going to find on this plane." Carol looked toward the cockpit door, then back at Maya, then around at the cabin full of terrified passengers. Maya saw the moment when desperation overruled every doubt. "Come with me quickly." As Maya followed Carol toward the front of the plane, she felt every eye in the cabin tracking her movement. She heard the whispers. "That is just a kid. Is that girl really going to fly us? Oh my God, we are all going to die." Maya forced herself not to look back. If she thought too hard about the weight of what she was about to attempt, about the 300 lives depending on a teenager with simulator experience, she knew she would freeze completely. At the cockpit door, Carol used her emergency override code to unlock it. When the heavy door swung open, Maya's worst fears were confirmed. Both pilots were slumped unconscious in their seats. The captain's head rested at an awkward angle against the side window, and the first officer had collapsed forward onto the center console. Soft warning chimes were sounding. "What happened to them?" Maya asked, stepping carefully into the cramped cockpit space, her eyes already scanning the instrument panels. "We do not know exactly," Carol said, her voice breaking. "About 25 minutes ago, they both complained of severe headaches and dizziness. Then they just collapsed. We think it might be carbon monoxide poisoning or some kind of toxic fume event." Maya's mind immediately jumped to her emergency training. "We need to maximize fresh air circulation immediately. Have someone open all the overhead air vents in the cabin to full flow, and I need supplemental oxygen." Carol nodded quickly and rushed away. Maya stood in the cockpit doorway, taking in the scene with a strange mixture of terror and focused calm. This was the moment every simulator session had unknowingly been preparing her for. She looked at the hundreds of switches and digital displays that she had memorized from diagrams and videos, at the control yoke sitting in their neutral positions. This was completely real. This was actually happening. 300 people were depending on her, and she had never actually flown an airplane outside of a computer simulation. Maya took several deep breaths and sat carefully in the captain's seat. It felt different from her simulator chair at home. More solid, more real. The weight of actual responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Her eyes moved systematically across the instrument panel. The autopilot was engaged, maintaining level flight at 37,000 feet, following the programmed route toward New York. That was good. That gave her time to think. The aircraft was stable, flying smoothly, all systems showing normal. She had time. Carol returned with a portable oxygen bottle and mask. Maya put it on immediately, taking several deep breaths of clean oxygen. Then with hands that trembled only slightly, she reached for the radio headset, remembering the emergency frequency procedures she had memorized. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "This is Flight 2847, Boeing 767. Both pilots incapacitated. I am a passenger with extensive simulator training attempting to establish emergency communication." For what felt like an eternity, all Maya heard was static. Then a male voice responded, professional and urgent. "Flight 2847, this is Seattle Center. Confirm both pilots are unable to perform duties." "Confirmed," Maya replied, falling into the precise language she had learned. "Both pilots are unconscious and unresponsive. Suspected toxic fume event. I am a passenger with simulator experience on the 767. I need immediate guidance." There was a longer pause. Maya could imagine the shock her transmission must be causing. A teenage passenger trying to fly a Boeing 767 with 300 people on board. It was unprecedented, impossible. Flight 2847, what is your name and age? My name is Maya Chin. I am 17 years old, but I have logged over 600 hours on high-fidelity 767 simulators. I know the aircraft systems and emergency procedures. Another pause while the controller consulted with supervisors. Okay, Maya. I am Controller Davis. Listen to me very carefully. You are not alone in this. We are going to walk you through everything step by step. First, I need you to confirm that autopilot is engaged and aircraft is stable. Maya scanned the flight control panel, verifying each mode and display. Autopilot engaged. Altitude hold active at 37,000 feet. Heading 090 degrees, air speed 490 knots. All flight director modes are active. Aircraft is stable. Excellent, Maya. That is exactly what we need to hear. Very well done. Do not touch any controls yet. The autopilot is keeping you safe. Now, what is your current fuel state? Maya found the fuel quantity gauges. Approximately 44,800 pounds of fuel remaining. Copy that. You have plenty of fuel. Here is what is happening right now. We are coordinating with Boeing's emergency response team, with senior 767 training captains, with everyone who can help. You are going to have a team of the best aviation professionals in the world guiding your every move. But I need you to tell me honestly, can you do this? Maya looked at the unconscious pilots beside her, then out at the endless sky. She thought about all those nights in her simulator. All those procedures she had practiced, all that knowledge she had absorbed because she loved aviation with every fiber of her being. She thought about her parents waiting for her call, about the 300 people behind her who were trusting someone to get them safely home. Yes, she said simply with quiet confidence. I can do this. What Maya did not know was that her Mayday call had set off alarm bells throughout the entire North American aviation system. Emergency protocols were being activated at multiple facilities. The FAA's crisis management team was being assembled. Boeing's Technical Emergency Response Unit was mobilizing. Senior airline captains were racing to air traffic control centers. News organizations were picking up the story. Within minutes, the entire world would be watching. The next 75 minutes passed in a state of hyper-focused calm. The autopilot continued to fly the aircraft smoothly while Maya worked through a comprehensive systems check with Controller Davis, verifying every gauge, every indicator, every warning system. Hydraulic systems all showing green, normal pressure in all three systems, Maya reported. Electrical systems nominal. Both generators online. Cabin pressurization holding steady. Engines running smoothly. All parameters within normal range. Outstanding work, Maya. You are doing everything perfectly. Now, we have Captain Sarah Morrison here. She is a senior 767 captain with United Airlines. Over 15,000 hours of flight time. She is going to help guide you through the approach and landing. A new voice came through Maya's headset. Female and authoritative, but also warm and reassuring. Maya, this is Captain Morrison. I understand you have been studying my favorite airplane. Yes, ma'am. The 767 is incredible. It certainly is. I have been flying this aircraft for 13 years, and I am going to teach you everything you need to know to land it safely. But first, I need you to understand something important. Landing is going to be the most challenging part. We are not going to rush it. We are going to take all the time we need. We are going to do everything methodically and carefully, and I am going to be with you on the radio for every single step. Can you follow my instructions exactly as I give them? Yes, ma'am, I can. Good. Now, tell me about your simulator experience. What kinds of scenarios have you practiced? Maya thought back through countless hours. I have practiced standard approaches and landings, single-engine scenarios, hydraulic failures, electrical malfunctions, manual reversion flying, crosswind landings in various conditions. I have flown approaches to maybe 60 different airports in different weather conditions. Excellent. Have you practiced any single-pilot operations? Some, yes, but most scenarios assume two pilots working together. That is completely fine. Here is what we are going to do. We are going to break down every single task into small, manageable steps. You are going to focus on one thing at a time, and you are not going to move forward until I tell you to. Nothing happens until I say so. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Understood. Perfect. First major decision. Where are we going to land? You are currently over Montana. Looking at your route and our options, Denver International is about 200 miles ahead. They have the longest runways in the region. Weather is clear and calm, and they are already preparing for your arrival. That is where we are taking you. Maya felt a small surge of relief. Denver. She had practiced approaches to Denver International dozens of times. She knew the airport layout, the runway configurations, the approach procedures. Behind her in the cabin, word had spread about who was sitting in the cockpit. Some passengers were crying quietly, others were deep in prayer, and many sat in stunned silence. Parents held their children close. The elderly couple were holding hands so tightly their fingers had gone white. Carol and the other flight attendants were doing their best to maintain calm, though their own faces showed the fear they were trying to hide. One passenger had demanded to know if there was really no one else who could fly the plane. Carol had firmly told him that Maya was their best and only option and that everyone needed to trust her. Maya, Captain Morrison's voice brought her back to focus. In about 40 minutes, we are going to begin our descent into Denver. Before we do that, I need you to understand what you are going to experience. When you disconnect the autopilot for the landing, the aircraft is going to feel heavy and powerful in your hands. Your job is to make small, smooth corrections. Do not overcorrect. Think of it like driving a car on ice. Everything happens more slowly, and you need to be gentle. Small corrections, gentle inputs. Do not overcorrect. Got it? Good. Now, I want you to very lightly rest your hands on the control yoke. Do not move it. Just feel it. Feel what the autopilot is doing. Maya placed her hands carefully on the yoke, and immediately she felt the subtle movements, the tiny adjustments the autopilot was constantly making. It was alive under her hands, responsive and powerful. I feel it, she said quietly. It is making constant small corrections. That is exactly right. Now, I want you to look outside and tell me what you see. Maya looked through the windscreen at the endless sky, impossibly blue and clear. Far below, the landscape was a patchwork of fields and forests. The horizon curved gently. It is beautiful, she whispered. Captain Morrison's voice softened. It is it not? That view is why we do this job, Maya. You are about to join a very exclusive group of people who truly understand what it means to fly. Are you ready? Maya thought about all the time she had dreamed of sitting in this seat. She had never wanted it like this, never wanted the enormous weight of all these lives depending on her. But here she was. This was her moment, terrifying and real. I am ready, she said firmly. All right, in 10 minutes, we begin our descent. I want you to start mentally reviewing your procedures. Landing gear extension, flaps configuration, speed management, thrust control. Tell me the basic sequence. Maya closed her eyes and visualized the landing sequence she had practiced so many times. Descend to traffic pattern altitude following ATC vectors. Configure aircraft progressively with flaps at assigned altitudes. Extend landing gear below 10,000 feet and verify 3 green lights. Establish final approach configuration with full flaps. Maintain precise air speed and glide path. Touchdown in the touchdown zone on center line. Deploy thrust reversers immediately. Apply brakes smoothly. Perfect. Absolutely perfect, Maya. Now, let us make it happen for real. The next hour became a masterclass in precision flying. Step by methodical step, they brought Flight 2847 down from cruising altitude. Maya, begin descent to flight level 280. Set vertical speed to 1,500 feet per minute. Maya's hands moved to the autopilot controls. Descending to 28,000 feet at 1,500 feet per minute. The aircraft's nose pitched down slightly. Behind her, passengers felt their ears pop with the pressure change. Beautiful, Maya. How does the aircraft feel? Stable, responding exactly as expected. At 25,000 feet, it was time to begin configuring the aircraft for landing. Maya, extend flaps to position 1. Maya's hand moved to the flap lever. Immediately, she felt the aircraft's characteristics change. Flaps 1 extended, speed decreasing to 280 knots. Perfect. Continue descent to 18,000 feet. Denver approach control had cleared all other traffic within a 100-mile radius, creating a vast protected airspace for Flight 2847. Every controller was monitoring Maya's progress. Emergency vehicles were positioning at the airport. At 12,000 feet, Maya could see Denver in the distance. The city spreading across the plains with the Rocky Mountains as a dramatic backdrop. The airport was a geometric pattern of runways and taxiways. Her heart rate increased as the moment of truth approached. Maya, extend flaps to position 5. Maya moved the lever, felt another change in the aircraft's behavior. Now, I need you to extend the landing gear. This is important. When you move it down, you are going to hear a loud rumbling sound and feel significant vibration. The nose is going to want to pitch down sharply. Be ready to add power. Maya's hand hovered over the landing gear lever. She took a breath and pulled it down. The rumble was immediate and dramatic, much louder than in any simulator. Maya felt the entire aircraft shudder. The nose dropped and she saw the descent rate increase. Add power, Maya. Her hand moved to the throttle levers, pushing them forward. The engine tone increased and the nose steadied. 3 green lights illuminated. Gear down. 3 green lights, Maya reported, pride creeping into her voice. Beautifully done. You are a natural at this. Now, let us bring you home. At 6 miles from the runway, Captain Morrison gave the instruction Maya had been both dreading and anticipating. Maya, it is time. You need to disconnect the autopilot and take manual control. The disconnect button is on the yoke where your thumb rests. Maya's thumb found the button. This was the moment everything changed. Once she pressed this button, there would be no computer helping her, no safety net. Just her, the aircraft, and 300 lives. She pressed the button. A soft chime sounded, and suddenly the control yoke came alive in her hands with a presence she had never felt in simulation. Every tiny movement she made translated directly into the motion of a 180-ton aircraft. She made a small correction, felt the wings respond. You have got it, Maya. You are flying now. Let us talk you down. Check your air speed. Showing 175 knots. Perfect. Extend flaps to 30 degrees. Maya's hand moved to the flap lever. The aircraft slowed and became more stable, settling into its landing configuration. The runway was ahead now, a long strip of concrete. But Maya had done this before, hundreds of times in her mind, and her hands moved with growing confidence. 1,000 feet altitude, Captain Morrison's voice was steady and calm. You are perfectly on glide path. Maintain 155 knots. Maya's eyes moved constantly, scanning between instruments and the view outside. 500 feet. You are doing beautifully, Maya. At 50 feet, I am going to tell you to flare. That means gently pulling back on the yoke to raise the nose and slow your descent. The runway was rushing up now, growing larger with every second. Maya could see the touchdown zone markings. Could see emergency vehicles lining the taxiways. 200 feet. 100 feet. 50 feet. Maya, begin your flare now. Gentle pull back. Maya's hands moved smoothly, pulling the yoke back, feeling the nose rise. The aircraft transitioning from descent to that perfect moment just above the runway. The ground was right there, and then the main landing gear touched the runway with a gentle chirp of rubber on concrete. Maya held the nose up for a moment, then let the nose wheel settle. Without hesitation, her hands moved to deploy the speed brakes and pull the thrust reverser levers. The roar of the reversers filled the cockpit as the aircraft began decelerating rapidly. Maya's feet found the rudder pedals, keeping them aligned with the center line, and her hands moved to the brake pedals, applying smooth pressure. They rolled down the runway, speed bleeding away, and finally, 3,000 feet from where they had touched down, Maya brought Flight 2847 to a complete stop. For a moment, there was absolute silence on the radio. Then, Captain Morrison's voice came through thick with emotion. Maya Chin, that was a perfect landing. You just saved 300 lives. Maya sat back in the seat, her hands still on the controls, and tears began streaming down her face. Behind her, the cabin erupted in cheers, sobs, and applause that shook the aircraft. She had done it. She had actually done it. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within seconds. Paramedics rushed aboard to treat the unconscious pilots, who would fully recover after treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning. As Maya finally stood up from the captain's seat, her entire body shaking with released adrenaline, Carol threw her arms around the teenage girl who had saved everyone. You did it, she sobbed. You beautiful, amazing girl. You did it. As Maya was led from the cockpit into the cabin, every single passenger rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears streamed down countless faces. People reached out to touch her, to thank her, to tell her she was a hero. The elderly couple grasped her hand and said, "Young lady, you gave us more years with our grandchildren. Thank you does not seem like enough." Within hours, Maya's story had exploded across every news outlet in the world. Television networks showed footage of the 767 landing, played audio of her calm communications with ATC, interviewed aviation experts who were calling her achievement extraordinary, unprecedented, miraculous. Her name was trending on every social media platform. But sitting in a quiet room at the Denver airport, finally able to video call her parents who were sobbing with relief and pride, Maya did not feel like a hero. She just felt grateful. Grateful for every night she had spent in her simulator when she could have been doing something else. Grateful for every procedure she had memorized. Grateful that when it mattered most, she had been prepared. Captain Morrison came to see her before she left the airport. She shook Maya's hand firmly, looking her directly in the eyes, and said, "Maya, I have been flying professionally for 20 years. I have trained hundreds of pilots, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you did today was extraordinary. When you turn 18, you call me directly. I will personally ensure you get into the finest flight training program in this country." 3 months later, Maya Chin stood before her entire high school at graduation, delivering the commencement speech about her experience. "People call me a hero," she said, looking out at the sea of faces, including her beaming parents. "But I want you to understand something. I am not a hero. I am just someone who loved something so much that I studied it obsessively. I practiced when I could have been doing easier things. And when the moment came when people needed me, I was ready." She paused. "What I learned that day at 37,000 feet is this. The passions you pursue, the knowledge you gather, even when others do not understand why, those things matter more than you can imagine. You never know when the world will need exactly what you have been preparing for your entire life." Years later, Captain Maya Chin would taxi a Boeing 767 away from the gate on her first flight as a fully licensed airline pilot. But she would always remember her first real flight, the one where she sat alone in the cockpit at 17 years old, responsible for strangers she had never met, guided only by her love of aviation and her determination to never give up. The story of the 17-year-old girl who landed a passenger jet alone became legendary in aviation. A reminder that heroes are not always the ones with the most credentials or experience. Sometimes heroes are simply the ones who are ready when they are needed, who prepared through passion, who were capable of the impossible because they never stopped believing in themselves.